factoring a perfect square quadratic. Here's an example of a perfect square. X squared plus 16x plus 64. Now, on a perfect square, the last term is always positive. The first term, if you take the square root of it, the square root of x squared is x. The last term, if you take the square root of it, it will be 8. So the first and the last terms have perfect squares. Now, to factor this, x squared plus 16x plus 64. Two parentheses. The first term will be what we got for the square. When we took the square root of that first term, that's x. So the first term in both of the factored parentheses is x. The last term will be what we got when we took the square root of the last term up here. When we took the square root of 64, square root of 64 is 8. The sign is the sign of the middle term. Both parentheses have the same sign. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to check your work. So this is just a check. What I've got right here that I just underlined, that is the factorization. But now we're going to check to make sure that this is factored correctly. Now the first term, x times x, gives us x squared. The last term, when we take the last times the last, the 8 times the 8, that's 64. That's a positive 64. The middle term comes from here. When we take the 8 times the x, we get plus 8x. And we take the first times the last, x times 8, we get plus 8x. So that's 8x plus 16x plus 64. This here matches what we started out with. Here's another example. 4x squared plus 20x plus 25. Now, when I take the square root of that first term, the square root of 4x squared is 2x. I take the square root of the last term, 25, square root of 25 is 5. Two parentheses. This first term, the 2x, that's what goes in both, the first position in both parentheses. The 5 that I got when I took the square root of 25 is the last term. The sign is the sign of the middle term. Now, x squared, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 5 times 5 is 25. So the first term and the last term is fine. Check the middle term. 5 times 2x is 10x. 2x times 5 is 10x. So there's our middle term, 20x. Another example. 16x squared minus 48x plus 36. Again, I take 16x squared, take the square root of that, I get 4x. The last term, 36, I take square root of that, I get 6. Two parentheses is 4x, goes in the first position of both parentheses. The 6 goes in the last position of both parentheses. The sign is the sign of the middle term, and they are both negative. The signs always have to be the same. Now, 4x times 4x 4x times 4x is 16x squared. Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. And here's our middle term. Negative 24x, 4x times negative 6, negative 24x, which is negative 48x. That's the check. The factors are 4x minus 6, 4x minus 6. That's the factorization. Here's another. 16x squared plus 25 minus 40x. 16x squared, the square root of that is 4x. The square root of 25 is 5. Two parentheses. The 4x goes in the first position of both parentheses. The 5 goes in the last position. The sign of both parentheses is negative. We know that the first term, 4x times 4x, 16x squared, negative 25, or negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. And here's our middle term, minus 20x. 4 times negative 5 is negative 20x, negative 40x. X squared minus 12x plus 4. Two parentheses. 9x squared, the square root of 9x squared is 3x. That's what goes in the first position of both of the parentheses. The square root of 4 is 2. The middle term is a negative, so both of these are negatives. The check, 3x times 3x is 9x squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 times 3x is negative 6x. 3x times negative 2 is negative 6x. Add those together, negative 12x. $25x squared plus 121 plus 110x. Factor the two parentheses. 25x squared, the square root of that is 5x. So that's what goes to the first position of the two parentheses. 121, the square root of that is 11. That goes in the last position. The sign of the middle term is positive, so these are both positive. 5x times 5x, 25x squared. 11 times 11 is 121. The middle term, 55x, and that's positive. And 5 times 11 is 55x, which is 110x. So, 5x plus 11 times 5x plus 11 is the factorization. So that's how you factor perfect squares. Now, a perfect square, 4x squared, the last term is always positive. The middle term can either be positive or negative. So I could have negative 36x, that's a perfect square, or I could have 4x squared plus 36x plus 81. Factors, 2x, 2x. Both terms are negative. A negative times a negative gives me a positive. 9 and 9. This one here factors to 2x, 2x, because the middle term now is positive, these are both plus 9 and 9. There you have it. Factoring a perfect square quadratic.